Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that your life savings are gone. The bank where your father kept every dollar has closed its doors. Your mother is standing in a bread line for food. Men in expensive suits who once laughed inside luxury restaurants are now sleeping on park benches. Factories are silent. Children are hungry. Newspapers scream one terrifying word: crash. This was not a movie. This was real America. In 1929, the United States was one of the richest countries on earth. People believed the good times would never end. Stock prices rose every day. Ordinary workers borrowed money to buy shares. Families bought radios, cars, and refrigerators even when they could not truly afford them. The future looked bright, fast, and modern. But then, almost overnight, everything collapsed. This is the story of the Great Depression, the moment when America went from unbelievable wealth to massive poverty. And it all began with one dangerous belief: the market will rise forever. During the 1920s, America looked unstoppable. The First World War had ended, and unlike Europe, the United States had become stronger and richer after the war. American factories produced cars, steel, electricity, clothing, and machines faster than ever before. Cities grew quickly. Jazz music filled dance halls. Hollywood movies became popular across the country. Many Americans believed they were living in a new golden age. One man symbolized this new America better than anyone else: Henry Ford. Ford's factories changed the world. His company produced automobiles so efficiently that ordinary workers could finally afford cars. The famous Ford Model T became a symbol of success and freedom. For millions of families, life suddenly felt modern. Electric lights replaced candles. Radios brought music and news into homes. New washing machines and refrigerators made life easier. Advertising exploded across the country, convincing people to buy more and more products. But beneath the excitement, dangerous problems were quietly growing. Many Americans were not actually rich. They only looked rich. Banks made borrowing money easy. Stores allowed customers to buy products with installment plans. People could purchase expensive items and pay later in small monthly amounts. At first, this felt wonderful. A factory worker earning modest wages could suddenly own a car, a radio, and nice furniture. Families believed the future would always be better, so debt did not seem dangerous. But the biggest obsession in America was not cars or radios. It was the stock market. The stock market fever. By the late 1920s, Wall Street had become the center of national excitement. Every day, newspapers printed stories about ordinary people becoming rich through stocks. Taxi drivers gave stock tips. Teachers invested savings. Even small shop owners borrowed money to buy shares. The stock market no longer felt like gambling. People believed it was guaranteed wealth. One of the most powerful men in finance during this time was Charles E. Mitchell, leader of National City Bank. Banks encouraged customers to invest heavily in stocks. Financial companies promoted the idea that the market could only go up. Many investors bought stocks on margin. This meant they borrowed money to buy shares. For example, a person could buy $1,000 worth of stock while paying only $100 of their own money. The rest came from loans. As long as stock prices continued rising, everyone made profits. And prices kept rising. In 1928 and early 1929, the market climbed higher and higher. People became greedy. Some quit jobs to become full-time investors. Others mortgaged homes to buy stocks. Warnings existed, but few listened. One respected investor, Roger Babson, publicly warned that a huge crash was coming. But most Americans laughed at him. Newspapers mocked pessimists. President Herbert Hoover also spoke confidently about America's future. Many citizens trusted that prosperity would continue forever. The country was drunk on optimism. But behind the scenes, the economy was becoming weak. Factories produced more goods than people could actually buy. Farmers struggled with falling crop prices. Workers' wages did not rise as fast as company profits. Wealth became concentrated among a small group of rich Americans. Still, nobody wanted to stop the party. Then came October 1929, Black Thursday. On October 24, 1929, panic suddenly entered Wall Street. That morning, stock prices began falling rapidly. Investors rushed to sell shares before prices dropped further. Crowds gathered outside the New York Stock Exchange. Traders shouted across the trading floor. Telephone lines became overloaded. Fear spread everywhere. By midday, the market had lost billions of dollars. Several powerful bankers tried to calm the panic. They publicly bought stocks to show confidence. For a short moment, the market stabilized. Some people believed the crisis had ended. It had not. Only 5 days later came the real disaster. Black Tuesday, October 29, 1929. Black Tuesday. One of the darkest days in American financial history. From the morning opening bell, chaos exploded across Wall Street. Investors desperately tried to sell stocks, but buyers disappeared. Prices collapsed at terrifying speed. More than 16 million shares were traded in a single day, a shocking number at that time. Fortunes vanished within hours. Some businessmen lost millions of dollars in one afternoon. Banks suffered enormous damage because they had loaned money to investors. Families who borrowed heavily suddenly owed huge debts while their stocks became nearly worthless. Newspapers printed horrifying headlines. Panic spread across the nation. Many Americans first believed the crash was temporary. They assumed the economy would recover quickly, but they were wrong. The stock market crash was only the beginning. Banks begin to fail. As stock prices collapsed, confidence in banks also began disappearing. People worried their savings were unsafe. Across America, frightened citizens rushed into banks demanding cash immediately. This was called a bank run. But banks did not keep all customer money inside vaults. Much of the money had been loaned out or invested. When too many customers demanded cash at once, banks could not survive. Thousands of banks failed. One by one, doors closed forever. Families lost life savings overnight. Imagine working 20 years, saving carefully every month, and then suddenly hearing that your bank is gone and your money no longer exists. This nightmare became reality for millions. In cities and small towns, fear grew deeper every week. Businesses began collapsing too. Factories reduced production because fewer people could buy products. Workers lost jobs. Stores closed. Construction projects stopped. Unemployment started rising quickly. At first, many Americans still believed the crisis would pass. But by 1930, the country understood something terrible was happening. America was entering the worst economic disaster in its history. Bread lines and empty streets. One heartbreaking symbol of the Great Depression was the bread line. Charities and churches distributed free food to hungry families. Long lines formed in cities like New York City and Chicago. Men wearing old coats waited for hours simply to receive bread and soup. Many had once lived comfortable, middle-class lives. Now they had nothing. Photographs from the time show thousands of unemployed workers standing silently in crowded streets. Their faces looked tired, ashamed, and frightened. In some areas, homeless camps appeared. Americans cruelly nicknamed them Hoovervilles, blaming President Hoover for the suffering. Meanwhile, farmers faced another disaster. Crop prices collapsed so badly that many farmers could not pay debts. Banks took farms away from families who had owned land for generations. Then nature made everything worse. A terrible environmental disaster called the Dust Bowl began across the Great Plains. Massive dust storms destroyed farmland in states like Oklahoma and Texas. Thousands of desperate families packed belongings into cars and traveled west searching for work. Many never found it. The human cost. The Great Depression was not just about money. It changed human lives forever. Parents skipped meals so children could eat. Young people abandoned dreams of college. Men who once felt proud and strong suddenly could not provide for families. Depression and hopelessness spread across the nation. Some people became angry at banks and wealthy businessmen. Others blamed politicians. Many simply felt confused. How could the richest country in the world collapse so quickly? Why had nobody stopped this disaster? One important writer captured this suffering powerfully: John Steinbeck. His famous book, The Grapes of Wrath, described struggling American families during the Depression and Dust Bowl years. The stories were painful because they were true. By the early 1930s, millions of Americans were unemployed. Fear controlled daily life, and people began demanding change. Soon, a new leader would appear promising hope, action, and a New Deal for the American people. But before recovery could begin, the country still had to survive its darkest years. And in the next part of this story, America's economic nightmare will grow even worse before it finally begins to fight back. The winter of 1932 felt endless in America. Cold winds moved through empty streets. Factory smoke disappeared from city skylines. In thousands of homes, parents sat silently at dinner tables with almost no food to serve. By now, the Great Depression was no longer just a financial crisis. It had become a fight for survival. Millions of Americans woke up every morning with the same terrifying question: how will we live tomorrow? The stock market crash had destroyed wealth, but the deeper disaster came afterward. Businesses continued failing month after month. Banks disappeared. Farms collapsed. Entire towns lost hope. And the worst part was this: nobody knew when it would end. America without work. By 1932, unemployment had reached shocking levels. Around 13 million Americans had no jobs. Factories that once produced cars, steel, and machines now stood silent. In cities like Detroit, workers searched desperately for employment, but companies were firing people instead of hiring them. Some men walked dozens of miles looking for work. Others stood outside factories from sunrise until night, hoping a manager might suddenly need one extra worker for a single day. Many never got chosen. For proud American families, unemployment brought deep humiliation. A father who once earned steady wages could suddenly provide nothing for his children. Some sold furniture to buy food. Others lost homes completely after missing rent payments. In many cities, landlords threw families into the streets. Photographs from the time show mattresses, chairs, and clothing piled on sidewalks, while children watched in fear. Meanwhile, soup kitchens became crowded every day. Organizations like the Salvation Army and local churches worked constantly to feed hungry citizens. Volunteers distributed bread, potatoes, and thin soup to thousands. But charity alone could not save the country. The crisis had become too large. President Hoover's struggle. At the center of the storm stood President Herbert Hoover. When Hoover entered office in 1929, he was respected as a successful businessman and engineer. Many Americans believed he was intelligent and capable. But during the Depression, public opinion turned against him quickly. Hoover believed strongly in limited government intervention. He thought businesses and local communities should solve problems themselves instead of depending heavily on the federal government. At first, he hoped the economy would recover naturally. It did not. As unemployment grew worse, critics accused Hoover of being disconnected from ordinary people's suffering. Newspapers attacked him daily. Angry citizens blamed him for hunger, homelessness, and bank failures. The nickname Hooverville spread across America. Homeless camps built from wood, cardboard, and scrap metal appeared near cities. Families lived inside tiny shelters without electricity or running water. People used the president's name sarcastically. Hoover blankets meant newspapers used as blankets. Hoover leather meant cardboard placed inside worn-out shoes. For many Americans, Hoover became the face of failure. But the truth was more complicated. The economic disaster was so enormous that even experts did not fully understand how to stop it. Modern economic systems and protections barely existed. There was no federal insurance protecting bank savings, no massive unemployment system, no clear plan for handling a collapse this large. America was learning through suffering. The Bonus Army March. One event in 1932 deeply damaged Hoover's reputation. Thousands of World War I veterans traveled to Washington demanding early payment of promised military bonuses. These veterans were poor, unemployed, and desperate. Many brought wives and children. They built camps near the Capitol and peacefully protested for help. The group became known as the Bonus Army. At first, the protest remained calm, but the government feared disorder. Eventually, federal troops were ordered to remove the veterans from their camps. General Douglas MacArthur led soldiers, cavalry, and even tanks into the camps. The images shocked America. Veterans who had fought for their country were now being forced out by the U.S. Army itself. Fires burned through the camps while families escaped carrying belongings. Many Americans felt heartbroken and furious. The event made Hoover appear cold and uncaring, even though the situation was more complex behind the scenes. Confidence in his leadership collapsed, and soon Americans looked toward a new political figure for hope. Franklin D. Roosevelt appears. During the presidential election of 1932, one man spoke differently from everyone else. Franklin D. Roosevelt, often called FDR, promised bold action. Unlike Hoover, Roosevelt projected confidence and energy. He spoke directly to struggling Americans. He admitted the country faced terrible problems, but he insisted recovery was possible. His message was simple: the government must help the people. For millions living through fear and hunger, those words mattered deeply. Roosevelt won the election by a huge margin. When he became president in March 1933, the nation was near total economic collapse. Banks were failing everywhere. People rushed desperately to withdraw savings. Panic threatened to destroy the entire financial system. Roosevelt acted immediately. The bank holiday. Just days after entering office, Roosevelt announced something extraordinary. He temporarily closed all banks in America. This action became known as the bank holiday. At first, many citizens were terrified. Why would the president close every bank? But Roosevelt's goal was to stop panic. Government experts inspected banks one by one. Strong banks reopened first, while weak institutions remained closed. Then Roosevelt did something revolutionary for that time. He spoke directly to ordinary Americans through radio. These speeches became famous as the fireside chats. Families gathered around radios at night, listening carefully as Roosevelt explained complicated economic problems in calm, simple language. He sounded less like a distant politician and more like a trusted neighbor. Americans slowly regained confidence. When banks reopened, something surprising happened. Instead of withdrawing money, many people redeposited savings. Trust began returning. It was one of the first signs that America might survive. The New Deal begins. Roosevelt launched a massive program called the New Deal. The New Deal changed the role of the American government forever. For the first time, the federal government became deeply involved in helping unemployed citizens, regulating banks, and rebuilding the economy. Some Americans loved Roosevelt's programs. Others believed the government was gaining too much power. But almost everyone agreed that action was necessary. The New Deal created jobs through enormous public projects. Roads, bridges, dams, schools, and parks were built across the country. Millions of unemployed workers found jobs again through programs like the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration. Young men planted trees, repaired forests, and built infrastructure. Artists, writers, and musicians even received government support. Roosevelt believed unemployment itself was dangerous to democracy. People needed work, dignity, and hope. The Dust Bowl disaster. But while cities struggled economically, rural America faced another horror. The Dust Bowl continued devastating farming communities. Years of poor farming practices combined with severe drought created giant dust storms across the Great Plains. The sky sometimes turned black during the daytime. Dust entered homes, lungs, food, and water. Families covered faces with cloth just to breathe. Thousands abandoned farms in states like Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas. Many traveled west toward California, hoping for jobs and a better life. But conditions there were often terrible too. Migrants lived in crowded camps and worked long hours for extremely low pay. One famous photograph from this period became a symbol of American suffering. Migrant Mother by photographer Dorothea Lange. The image showed a worried mother surrounded by children during the Depression. Her face captured exhaustion, fear, and determination all at once. The photograph reminded Americans that behind economic statistics were real human lives. Fear, anger, and change. As Roosevelt's programs expanded, political debates grew intense. Some wealthy businessmen accused him of attacking capitalism itself. Others believed he still was not doing enough. Meanwhile, ordinary Americans felt many different emotions. Some regained hope for the first time in years. Others remained deeply angry. In factories, labor unions became stronger as workers demanded better wages and protections. Massive strikes erupted across industries. The Depression changed how Americans thought about government, business, and society. Before the crash, many people believed success depended entirely on individual effort. But after millions lost jobs through no personal fault, Americans began questioning old ideas. Could hard work alone protect people from disaster? Or did society need stronger safety systems? These questions would shape the future of the United States for generations. A nation waiting for recovery. By the mid-1930s, conditions improved slightly. Some banks stabilized. Certain industries recovered slowly. Public works projects created employment for millions. But America was still suffering badly. Unemployment remained high. Many families continued struggling daily. And then, just when recovery finally seemed possible, another economic downturn struck in 1937. Fear returned again. For millions of Americans, it felt like the nightmare would never fully end. But far away from America's borders, another dangerous storm was growing. In Europe, dictators were rising. A new global conflict was approaching. And ironically, the event that would finally help end the Great Depression was not a financial reform or a government program. It was war. In the next part of this story, the world will move toward World War II, and America's economy will transform in ways nobody expected. By 1938, many Americans were exhausted. Nearly 10 years had passed since the stock market crash. An entire generation had grown up surrounded by fear, unemployment, hunger, and uncertainty. Children who once dreamed about bright futures now watched parents struggle simply to survive. Across the United States, people asked the same painful question again and again. Will America ever recover? Some factories had reopened under President Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal programs, but millions still remained poor. Workers still searched for jobs. Farmers still fought debt and drought. The Great Depression had changed America deeply, but beyond America's borders, something even more dangerous was beginning. A new war was rising in Europe, and soon that war would completely reshape the American economy. Trouble in Europe. During the 1930s, several powerful dictators rose to power. In Germany, Adolf Hitler promised to rebuild the nation after the humiliation of World War I. In Italy, Benito Mussolini expanded military power. Meanwhile, Japan aggressively increased its influence in Asia. At first, many Americans wanted nothing to do with another global conflict. The memories of World War I were still painful, Families remembered soldiers who never returned home. Others believed American involvement in previous wars had only benefited wealthy industries. So while Europe moved closer toward disaster, most Americans focused on surviving the Depression. But on September 1st, 1939, everything changed. Germany invaded Poland. Just days later, Britain and France declared war on Germany. World War II had begun. America watches from a distance. At first, the United States remained neutral. President Roosevelt understood the growing danger of Hitler, but many citizens opposed entering another war. Polls showed strong public resistance to military involvement. Still, Roosevelt slowly increased support for countries fighting Germany. American factories began producing weapons, vehicles, and supplies for allies like United Kingdom. And something remarkable started happening. Factories reopened. Workers returned. Orders increased rapidly. The same industrial power that had once collapsed during the Depression suddenly became valuable again. Steel factories operated day and night. Shipyards hired thousands. Automobile companies began preparing military vehicles instead of civilian cars. The economy slowly awakened. But America still officially remained outside the war. Then came December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. That Sunday morning, Japanese aircraft attacked the American naval base at Attack on Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. The attack shocked the nation. More than 2,400 Americans died. Battleships burned. Smoke filled the sky. The next day, President Roosevelt spoke before Congress and called it a date which will live in infamy. The United States officially entered World War II, and almost overnight, the American economy transformed completely. The factories returned to life. The war created enormous demand for production. America needed planes, tanks, ships, uniforms, bullets, fuel, food, and medicine on a massive scale. Factories that had once stood silent during the Depression suddenly became crowded with workers again. Millions found jobs. Companies expanded rapidly. Assembly lines moved faster than ever before. Industrial cities exploded with activity. Boeing produced military aircraft at astonishing speed. Ford Motor Company built tanks and military equipment. Shipyards launched huge vessels into the oceans. Unemployment, once America's greatest nightmare, fell dramatically. By the mid-1940s, the country actually needed more workers than it could easily find. For many Americans, this felt unbelievable. After years of hopelessness, paychecks returned. Families could finally buy food regularly again. Homes regained electricity. Businesses reopened. The economy was alive once more. But the recovery came with sacrifice. Women enter the workforce. One of the biggest social changes during the war involved women. Because millions of men joined the military, factories needed new workers urgently. Women stepped into industrial jobs in enormous numbers. The image of Rosie the Riveter became a national symbol. Posters showed strong female factory workers wearing blue uniforms and confidently declaring, "We can do it." Women worked in aircraft factories, shipyards, offices, and transportation systems. Many earned wages independently for the first time in their lives. The war permanently changed expectations about women's roles in society. Meanwhile, African Americans also moved into industrial jobs in larger numbers. especially in northern cities. But discrimination and segregation still remained serious problems. The Depression and the war both revealed deep inequalities inside American society. The human cost of recovery. Even though the economy improved, the war itself brought terrible suffering. More than 16 million Americans served in the military during World War II. Families feared every telegram arriving at the front door. Many young soldiers never returned home. Cities overseas were destroyed. Millions of civilians died across Europe and Asia. The war became the deadliest conflict in human history. For Americans, economic recovery came tied to global tragedy. Factories became busy again because the world was at war. This uncomfortable truth stayed with many people long after victory. Still, by 1944 and 1945, one reality was clear. The Great Depression was effectively over. The enormous industrial demands of World War II had restarted the American economy on a massive scale. A new America emerges. When the war ended in 1945, the United States stood transformed. Unlike Europe and much of Asia, America's industries and cities remained physically intact. Its factories were stronger than ever. Its economy dominated global production. The country that had once suffered breadlines and bank collapses now emerged as the world's leading economic superpower. Millions of returning soldiers used programs like the GI Bill to attend college, buy homes, and build new lives. Suburbs expanded rapidly. The middle class grew larger. Consumer spending exploded during the late 1940s and 1950s. America entered a new age of prosperity. But people never fully forgot the Depression years. Older generations remembered hunger, fear, and unemployment for the rest of their lives. Many became careful savers because they understood how quickly wealth could disappear. Parents who survived the Depression often taught children powerful lessons. Never waste money. Always prepare for hard times. Do not assume success lasts forever. The lasting lessons. The Great Depression changed the United States permanently. Before the crash, many Americans believed markets could regulate themselves without major government involvement. After the Depression, the government took a much larger role in economic life. Bank regulations increased. Programs like Social Security helped elderly citizens. Financial protections became stronger. The crisis also changed politics. President Roosevelt's leadership reshaped the Democratic Party for generations. Debates about government responsibility, economic inequality, and workers' rights became central parts of American political life. And perhaps most importantly, the Depression proved one painful truth. Even the richest nation on earth can collapse if greed, fear, and weak financial systems grow out of control. The stock market crash of 1929 began with numbers on paper. But the real disaster happened afterward, inside homes, farms, factories, and human lives. Millions suffered not because they were lazy or weak, but because entire systems failed around them. That is why the Great Depression remains one of the most important chapters in modern history. Because it reminds the world how fragile prosperity can be. One decade, America looked unstoppable. The next, millions stood in bread lines praying for survival. And yet somehow, through suffering, change, sacrifice, and war, the nation rebuilt itself again. The Great Depression was more than an economic collapse. It was a test of endurance for an entire country.